A very good evening to one and all present here. I, Nikhil Bhardwaj, along with my co-host Ms. Nipsi Das, would like to welcome everyone on the marketing panel of Sapience, the annual management event of Great Lakes Institute of Management, Gurgaon. Thank you everyone for joining in. We would like to introduce everyone who is present here about a part of today's discussion. We have three esteemed panelists from the industry along with our faculty moderator. It gives us great pleasure to introduce Mr. Shashank Srivastava. Mr. Srivastava is the Executive Director at Maruti Suzuki Limited, and in his current role, he is responsible for the marketing and sales vertical, and it is in charge of both the marketing, brand marketing related activities, as well as retail channel management. An electronic engineer and a postgraduate from the prestigious IIM Ahmedabad. He has joined Maruti Suzuki as a management trainee for almost 30 years ago and has been through various functions like corporate planning, marketing, advertising, logistics, field sales, dealer development, institutional sales, sales planning, and international marketing. We welcome you, sir.
We welcome Mr. Sanjay Gupta to the panel. Mr. Gupta is the Marketing Director for APAC Markets at Uber. With more than 18 years of experience in building brands that drive growth, he is passionate about growth, brands, and people. He has worked in global, regional, and local marketing roles, both as the market leader and as the challenger brand. An illustrious alumnus of SRCC, MDI, and executive training at Harvard. Mr. Gupta has worked for brands such as Urban Ladder, Marico, Accenture. Welcome, sir.
Final and not last, it is our great pleasure to welcome Mr. Deepak Ohri, the CEO of Lebua Hotels and Resorts, Thailand, a veteran of the hospitality industry, having spent more than 30 years in it. Mr. Ohri is responsible for propelling the Lebua Hotel and Resorts exponential growth based on his celebrated concept of experiential luxury, which aims at creating lasting emotional experiences for guests. He is recognized globally as an award winning entrepreneur and celebrated speaker, being featured speaker at the Forbes Global CEO Conference, Financial Time Business, and Off Luxury Summit. Mr. Ohri is also a guest lecturer at many prestigious business schools, including Harvard Business School, Columbia University, NYU Stern School of Business, and MIT Sloan. We eagerly look forward for your insights, sir.
Welcome, esteemed panel members. Allow us to introduce the moderator for the panel today, our very own Professor Anirban Chaudhary, sir, a gold medalist MBA from Jadavpur University. Professor Anirban has worked in the advertising, marketing research, and brand management space for more than 20 years before joining Great Lakes as our resident digital guru. His expertise lies in brand advisory and integrated marketing communications. He is a speaker at various forums and has presented case studies at national and international seminars and conferences. Welcome, sir. Sir, we would request you to proceed with the panel discussion.
Thank you. Thank you, Nipsi. Thank you, Nikhil. And welcome everyone over here who are eager to hear our esteemed panelists. So as I had shared with you, Shashank, Sanjay, and Deepak, that we'll have a few rounds of interaction where we would like to understand more about how you manage the current crisis. So my first question goes to you, Shashank. While we know you are with the largest automobile company that we can think of in this country, but obviously the crisis brought everything to standstill, right? So what is it that you figured out in that point of time to restart the entire game for Maruti Suzuki in India?
So thank you, Anirban, and thank you for having me on this panel. Your question pertains to the situation in the auto industry during the pandemic. And then, as we all know, the pandemic was an unprecedented event. Never have we seen such an event, and hopefully we will not see it again. We came through a very, very bad and a very serious situation as far as retail sales were concerned. We had a hard lockdown end of March, and for the first time ever in the Indian industry, we had zero sales in April. And that is a very, very serious for an industry which is as capital intensive as ours, because cash flows are most important. With heavy inventory, with heavy money locked up in the inventory, it's obviously a very, very big challenge both for the manufacturers as also for our channel partners. So I think what we realized clearly was there was no way that the consumer is going to remain the same, and he certainly changed. And even today, we find that some of the changes which are brought by pandemic have I'm sure were irreversible. And one of the big changes we found was that there was the process of digitalization, which was in any case there even before the pandemic, accelerated to a huge extent. So we look at platforms, our digital platform, and for the um, mm, interest of those who are not very familiar with the auto industry, when we have researched the entire process that a car buyer goes through from the time he thinks of buying a car to the time when he actually purchased it. There are 27 touch points which are there in the entire journey, starting with first researching about the car, which segment to buy, what color, what price. Then he has to download a brochure. Then he goes to the dealership, does a test drive, financing, and so on and so forth. There are 27 touch points. 23 of them were already digitalized. So if you wanted to, for example, log in and lock your inquiry, your interest, you had that option on the website of Maruti Suzuki to do the. Similarly, if you wanted to know about the car, it is possible. We have a website which gives all the information. We even have people who interact with consumers on the net. So this process accelerated to the extent that 2016, we had just about 3% of our inquiries coming from digital platform. In the pandemic, they were close to 50%. So that's acceleration of 3% in 2016 to about 14-15% in 2019, just before the pandemic, 2020, just before the pandemic, to almost 50%. So what took 3 years for 3% to move to 15%, that 15% moved to 50% in just 3 months. So one big thing which happened was that the process of buying itself was changed. And that is fundamental in a traditional industry like the auto industry. So one big learning was that we had to quickly scale up our digital platform. We did that. Second thing, of course, if people are here from a marketing background, I assume a lot of students are taking that course as well. So if you look at first of all, people were not really keen to buy cars initially in this period. Rightly so, because they were more concerned about safety. And one of the things which came out very strongly was that trust would be the fundamental currency of brand differentiation. So it was no longer the product itself, it was no longer the services, it was the trust which the brand signifies. And we have seen in times such as the stress times that we see today, which we saw during the pandemic lockdown, people do shift towards the more established brand, the more well-known brand, the more trusted brand, the more known brands. And that's what we saw happening. So clearly the first thing was to build trust with the consumer, not necessarily to sell. So the communication strategy changed completely. So both from the perspective of the medium of communication to the communication itself. So the communication initially was clearly about public safety. It was about health. It was about what Maruti Suzuki was doing for the CSR, what they were doing for the people who were distressed because of the pandemic. So that was one strategy as far as communication message was concerned. Secondly, the consumption of communication also changed. From television, print, people started moving towards digital. From viewing things on print medium, they moved to, remember, even the times changed. The prime time, by the way, Anirban, for television viewing, the prime time during the pandemic lockdown was 11 o'clock in the morning. So we are, sort of used to this times being at 9 o'clock is prime time, 10 o'clock is prime time. The prime time itself changed. So we had to clearly look at what the new behavior was, not just what the process of buying was, but also new consumer behavior. And we did extensive research through digital means. We could figure out what the consumers wanted. And slowly, of course, one big thing came was digitalization, as I mentioned. The other thing was people wanted financing to be more tailor-made. So that was one big thing, because people were expecting loss of income. Some people were expecting loss of employment. Some people were expecting lower growth rates, the business being much lower. So we had to also tailor-made make financial scheme. And we are happy to say that we have, in as far as process is concerned, we have actually 3 different additional processes. I said 23 out of 27 were digital. We have now made it 26. Because we have also done the financing bit digitally as well. So now only a few things like delivery and test drive remain. And I suppose that's going to be physical, of course. So in auto industry, we don't talk of digital, we talk of phygital, which is some of the activities will remain physical. So we did a lot of those things. And as we go along in the discussion, we can say how things panned out. Fortunately for us, the rural demand started coming up. And you'll be surprised, even in tier 2, tier 3 towns, the digital process is really, really strong. And we have a very strong base. Maruti Suzuki has sold more than 2 crore cars, 2.2 crore cars so far. We had a very strong base. And how to manage it digitally, it's not easy. But we have actually customers who have been through us through almost 40 years. So that sort of database mining and management we did. And we could see that there was a strong bounce back in quarter 2, further stronger bounce back in quarter 3. And today we are looking at a much more positive forecast for the future. So this is how we, in broad terms, try to manage the situation. And hopefully going forward, we will go back to the good economic conditions, and our industry should flourish in the future as well.
Yeah, we all hope so, because this is one of the companies that would also decide how the sentiments in the market would move. Interestingly, you mentioned about financing, and I have a question. I'll come back to you later. In the context of financing, there is a very interesting model that we have seen in the auto industry, which is related to financing and ownership put together. And maybe I'll request you to elaborate on that as I come back to you.
Yeah.
So my next question is for Deepak, right? And Deepak, you have been redefining an area which people have always been aspirational about, which is luxury. And, I also came across your point of view on, creating a new kind of luxury, a new destination, which you call the vertical destination, right? But what is I'm very curious to understand is that the concept of luxury was probably again something that became out of bound for a lot of people during this period, right? So how did you redefine luxury in the times of crisis?
So mine is thank you very much, Dr. Anirban, and very good evening to fellow panelists, to Sanjay and Shashank. Such a pleasure to meet you in virtual world.
Good evening.
I'm wearing 3 hats that I'm going to talk about 3 continents. One is going to talk about Southeast Asia, India, and New Zealand, where our properties are located. But before coming to that, I'm the only misfit in the marketing conference, because at none of the Lebua hotels we have a marketing department. Okay, so the only misfit, but it's good to have a misfit in a panel of so the black sheep. So I'm one of the black sheep. So we have at Lebua, and I'll come to the thing, Dr. Anirban, you're asking. At Lebua, we have a policy. We don't have a policy of image. We have a policy of product. And when we don't have a policy of image and we have a policy of product, that's the reason we do not have a marketing department. Now, we believe in an emotional connection, and we believe that our workforce of 1,500 only globally everyone is a emotional connect or for this conference sake, I would say a marketing person and talking about us. So what is the first thing we will do? We'll protect our emotional connect. So during COVID, the first thing what we did, we forgot about luxury, we forgot about everything. We decided that we are not going to let any single employee go. We are 10 months down the crisis, and not even a single person has been asked to go at any of the Lebua locations. And I'm thankful to the different owners of supporting that we didn't let anyone go. Of course, we all took salary cuts and everything because we need to manage. Our hotel stayed closed for 4 months. Then we came with hotel to home concept. But hotel to home concept, our nearest competitor, just to give you an example, was selling at $2,000, and our minimum charge of going to anyone's home for 5 people was 15,000 US dollars in Bangkok. I'm not talking about local currency, 15,000 US dollars, and that doesn't include the wine. Okay, so what we did was, the reason we put the pricing high is not that we didn't want the business. We just wanted that they should come because the hotel had opened. They should come to the hotel and spend the money here, because that is where we are going to give them a real experience of Lebua. That is to Thailand, this thing. Second thing, luxury, which you asked, is a paradox. And why luxury is the paradox is the most desirable the brand becomes, the more it sells. The more it sells, the less desirable it becomes. And that's a reality. So Thailand, our property is very food and beverage focused, not for any other reason, because Thailand, the Thailand country GDP, which is 5 times smaller than India GDP, is 20%, 18 to 20% dependent on tourism. And there's no domestic tourism also, culturally. India, where the international tourism is less, domestic tourism is huge. When we open the properties, actually our performance of the only 2 small properties was much higher than pre-COVID days. And the reason that performance was higher than pre-COVID day, we could only relate to one thing: trust. A trust that every safety and hygiene protocol would be adhered to. And that is the only trust that made India did well. New Zealand was a struggle, not because of any other reason, but because of the country's regulation and everything. Now, compiling and comparing all these 3 different countries, cities, which would be 5 cities, we never, in food and beverage business, we never got our rates down in any of our hotels, including India. Now, what advantage it has given us? It didn't give us an advantage for 3 months. After opening, it was month of July, August, September. October onwards, we saw our occupancy of the new occupancy of the restaurants started rising. And we saw that average spend per person has gone up 30%, all across 3 properties. That is point number 1. Point number 2, what we noticed was, in Bangkok, we got the Michelin Awards. So we became the only hotel in Thailand as well as in the world to have 2 2-star plus the best service award. You will have many hotels with more than 2 restaurants 2-star, but no hotel in the world has best service award. So we could get that also during this time. And we saw that without us doing anything, but sticking to our principles of we are not going to compromise. The basic thing is we are not getting our raw materials cheaper. The cost of production is exactly the same. Okay, how we can give a cheaper price and cut our profits where we have already cut our employees' salary. So we stick to our fundamentals. And what we saw is that today, okay, as we are talking today, Bangkok is closed for 1 month because of the second wave. We hope to open in February. But what we saw in Bangkok in December, what we saw in India, what we're seeing in New Zealand is that we started doing quite well. So coming to that, luxury luxury doesn't mean expensive for me. For me, I am a firm believer. So as I don't know about you, Mr. Anirban, but Professor Venkatesh also, a toothpaste many years back, which was given a toothpaste sachet by Colgate in the villages, was a luxury for those villagers who had never seen a toothpaste. So it is very relative. I just got a WhatsApp message explaining me a difference between zero and infinity. In the end, the whole gist was everything is relative. So luxury is also relative. It is with what you are trying to compare.
Right. Very
So
interesting. Yeah.
sorry, please.
No, carry on. Carry on.
So sometimes many people think luxury is expensive. No, luxury is not expensive. It is relative. At that price point, we are giving an experience. It will be very difficult to replicate that experience in among some most competitors, and that's what our DNA is.
Great. So I'll come back to you more on trying to explore more about that. What of these changes that you see taking forward, as we all hope that will be moving out of the crisis
Sure,
sooner
definitely.
than later, right?
Thank
So let me now come to Sanjay, right? Hi, Sanjay. Now we all know Uber, right? Probably all of us have been using it. Sometime very excitedly, sometimes, if I may say so, grudgingly, with the surge pricing around. So how a brand like Uber, where the entire business model is built around mobility, and that's been questioned in the times of crisis, relook at the model. Is it time to relook at the model, or is it something where you see a new opportunity?
Firstly, thank you for having me here, Professor Anirban. It's an absolute pleasure, and thank you, Shashank and Deepak. I put down quite a few notes when you guys were speaking. And Deepak, while I haven't experienced the hotel, I can vouch for the efforts that Maruti has put in. I mean, we're close business partners, and my BD team speaks very, very highly of the efforts that you put in, Shashank, you and your team. So congratulations.
Thank you.
There's a lot that the team has done to keep a lot of people safe, and they're very, very appreciative of that. So like you said, Professor Anirban, for us, Uber is a company that's synonymous with movement. And, COVID is about just keeping you indoors. So for us, there was a dramatic shift in how we thought of our business. And I'll break it into three parts in terms of what we did. The first was Uber was a very purpose-driven company. It was created with a single-minded purpose, and we believe that movement actually creates opportunity. So we went back to our purpose to say, okay, what are the things we created Uber for, and how can we help in today's world? And the first point over there was, how do we do right by our customers and our communities? And the first thing that we did was for our riders. We actually put out a global campaign saying, don't ride. And that was done because if people were staying home, that's my dog, you'll hear him a few times. This is his wake up time, sir. This is really, if people stayed home, the spread of the pandemic would have been lesser. So we actually encouraged people to stay home and not ride with Uber. The second thing was, for a lot of our riders, movement was essential. If you were stuck in one part of the world or you were stuck in one part of the country, you needed to travel. So working with the regulators, we created a service called Uber Essential, which required you to have a lot of documentation. It required our drivers to be tested, and that enabled movement. And that was greatly appreciated by our riders because there was no way to move. Now imagine if you have a personal emergency or you just need to travel, that was something that a lot of people leveraged. And the third was, we really put safety as a priority. And Shashank used the word phygital, and that's how we describe the Uber business also, that it's an intersection between the physical world and the digital world. And we created a completely new process flow to make you feel confident that the Uber that you're taking is safe, both for the rider and the driver. On the driver side, it was completely different because, many times the money that they earn from Uber is actually a large part of their income. And, people were not traveling. So we launched this Uber Care Driver Fund, where we actually raised money and we were able to provide a small but substantial amount or a meaningful amount to 100,000 driver partners. which was again greatly appreciated. I had the privilege of making some of these calls, and it was unexpected to them that someone would call and say, okay, thank you for the effort that you put in. This is money, you don't need to return it. And hopefully that time we didn't know how long the pandemic would go on. It was very early in the pandemic stage, and that was greatly appreciated. The second thing was around distribution of PPE. For you and me, it's okay to buy sanitizers, hand wipes, because we need it for our home. You don't end up using it that much, but for drivers, it's a very expensive proposition to go and to use that on a daily basis. So we actually spend a lot of money, put in a lot of our distribution might, worked with a lot of our partners to enable that for our drivers. So if you drove for the Uber platform, you had access to PPE, you had access to a lot of information around what to do, what not to do. We installed safety screens for them, which bifurcated them from the riders so that they felt safer driving. Because for a lot of them, for a lot of India, actually, you can't afford to be in the COVID world for too long. You need to go out and work, you need to go out and earn. And that was really important for us. And for our communities, we prioritize the movement of healthcare workers. So we worked with a lot of institutions to provide services for our doctors. Those cabs, again, were top notch. The drivers were tested, the safety protocols were really good, but we were able to enable movement for a lot of medical officials. And this was done across the world. So none of it was unique to India, but it was just something that we were able to do because, we were able to facilitate movement. So we didn't think of our business as our regular business. We just thought of how can we bring our purpose to life in the situation or in the context of a pandemic. So that was one big work stream. I think the second one, and which may be more relevant to a lot of people who are listening here, is we really doubled down on listening to our customers. So we are a pretty customer-centric organization. It's a digital business. So if you have a bad trip, you let us know. If the app doesn't work, we get a ping. So we're anyway in touch with what our customers want, but we really double down to listen to them and try and see, okay, what is it that has changed? And we were able to create a lot of new processes and new systems. For example, hygiene safety was never a big thing, right? If you see how the pandemic has changed, and then, Shashank mentioned the touch points. So across the customer journey, which is the most important touch point? What is important? I don't know if any of you have traveled recently, but you will see a safety screen in Uber now, right? Which is almost, mandated. We're trying our best to just increase the coverage of that. And that was an insight that came from the riders and drivers, where the driver said, I feel safer if there's a safety screen because I don't know this rider. And the rider also said, that I don't know who sat before me in this. So can the trip be disinfected? So a lot of this were not part of our protocols earlier, but we were able to listen to our customers and bring that to life. And the third, and I think the most important thing which has served us well, was we didn't do any advertising. We spent all of that money in acts. So we raised money for the driver care fund. We distributed PPE for our drivers. And I think looking back, we've been greatly appreciated for not talking, but doing, or not saying, but actually making the service better for our riders and drivers. But to cut a long story short, lots of rework. What helped us the most was that we knew what our purpose was. Like Deepak spoke, we knew what the values were, and we just stayed true to that. And as we're coming out of the pandemic across different markets, we're seeing that actually that has helped us a lot, because in times of need, if you're able to do the right thing, you earn the customer's trust, and they tend to reward you a lot more as they get back to consumption.
Okay, great. Now for the second round, let me start with you, Sanjay, again. While you have just spoken, I'm just trying to break the order. Now you mentioned two very interesting things. One was obviously the trust that we all are speaking about, and that's important. So I have two questions on this. One is obviously, how do you communicate it? And you mentioned about acts over ads, right? But do you think acts, while the purpose is there, is good enough, and you don't need the ads part of it at all as you see things going forward? This has been something that in the marketing circle, I'm sure we have been always talking about ads versus acts. The second is, all these acts that we are talking about are really showing concern to the ecosystem, the stakeholders like driver partners, or even those who are riders. but how is it distinctive? Is there anything that helps it to become distinctive? Because maybe this has become the general concern or trust driver for many of the brands operating in business today.
Absolutely. We have a line in Uber that no one dislikes us because of our advertising. They dislike us or like us because of the experience. Right. So really our trust is earned if we are able to provide you a cab when you need it, the price is right and the service is good. And similarly for a driver, when they switch on our platform, are they able to get a trip? And is it meaningful for them in terms of, and is the experience good where the rider treats them well? Right. So for us, that has not changed. And what has changed in that is that there is a new marker now, a new attribute, for those who are learning the marketing definitions of safety, which is hygiene. And when you see a cab now and you enter and it doesn't look hygienic, you will feel unsafe. You didn't feel unsafe about it. You just felt it was a poor customer experience. And I think our ability to understand that and communicate it to our drivers has been great. Similarly, we've done extensive communication with our riders and drivers on how to keep safe during the pandemic. Because one of the things we realized, Professor Anirban, is that people who are traveling right now, they need to travel. So, and I talk about this, more from say July to maybe October. Right now, a lot of us are just traveling because we don't want to stay home. But I think in the initial parts, people were scared. And if they were traveling, they had, either a job to go to, they had an emergency to go to. It was very purposeful. And it was very important to just provide the right level of education and the right frequency of education on how to travel safely. And we spent a lot of time there. Fortunately for us, our app is a good way to interface with us. So we don't need to spend on traditional marketing. We don't do TV advertising. We haven't done it for a long period of time. It's not something that is efficient for us. We're able to get our message communicated in more efficient manners. And the second one was just how do we reset the equation between riders and drivers, and how do we make the whole community more responsible? We put out a very small scale campaign where we said that let's make it safer for each other. So if I am safe for myself, I become safe for you. And if you are safe for yourself, you become safe for the third person. And our entire education around that was just do the three things that the world is asking you to do, wear your mask, very, very basic things, and that enabled safety. What hasn't changed, and I think these will stay for some time. So across the world, fortunate enough to see markets like Hong Kong, Taiwan, where COVID recovery has been much faster and they're in like wave 4, wave 5 of it. Some of these things continue to be important for our consumers and our drivers. What has not changed is that there is a priority to experience still. So all the traditional markers of reliability, of the price being right, of the driver being good, of the rider being good. So some of those will not change. But I think like I mentioned earlier, by working on the things that changed, the consumers, both riders and drivers, felt we were consumer centric. They experienced our consumer centricity, and that won us trust. Right. So when we come to the third section, I think one of the big lessons out of this is I'll share then, but really the hard work that you do in a moment of crisis really rewards you, when the crisis
forward
is over. Correct.
That's the distinctive memory that you're creating for. Okay, interesting. So Shashank, back to you now. And I had hinted, about the financing and ownership, and probably my intent was to talk about a new, business model. Now, not new, but if I look at it from a mass market point of view, obviously it's not something that was very prevalent, right? Which is the subscription model that we saw. And we'd like to hear more from you on two counts on that. How do you see that as, offering during the time of crisis? And do you see a life for it beyond that? Is it going to become a dominant business model going forward? And, that would depend on the consumer behavior related to, what people have experienced now and what probably is going to shift for them, right? So if you can just help us understand that.
Yeah. So as I was saying, that there are certain trends which the pandemic clearly accelerated. Some of them would be reversible. For example, the digital platform processes which I mentioned, they will probably be reversible even after the pandemic. The shared mobility, which came down drastically, is a reversible process. So I think once things are normal and the psychological scars or the fear goes away, then I think shared mobility will again make a big comeback. So there are some things which this pandemic accelerated, which are reversible, and some which are not. And having said that, I'll just like to make a quick point about that ad versus the spend versus doing part. Yes, of course. So one of the things I mentioned earlier was that trust was the most important part with consumers. And what Maruti Suzuki also did at the beginning was to make a standard operating process at the dealership, which was significantly different, whether it was in terms of the social distancing, in terms of sanitization or temperature monitoring, and so on and so forth. But one important thing was that you need to, because it's a digital industry, you need to also convey to consumers to give them this confidence. So while you may not, it doesn't look proper for conveying things on the CSR front, which you do, and we did. Like for example, we went into manufacturing of we helped one of the India was going through very tough times in terms of the ventilators. We did not have enough. So we tied up with one of the ventilator manufacturers and gave our expertise on supply chain, even getting equipment, etc., etc. So, but we did not sort of advertise it. There's no point talking about it. It's something which has to be felt, and other people have to talk about it. But however, on things like the new SOPs at the dealerships, which gives consumers the confidence to come and take the cars, we did. The point about subscription, which you mentioned, subscription, I believe, and I think it's a very common question which is asked to me these days, will it survive after the pandemic? Actually, it's not so much related to pandemic, first of all. It is just that in the pandemic, probably the effect seemed to be much more. And subscription really refers to a new trend which we find in consumer buying behavior. And it's not just about automobile, it's about all product categories, including white goods, including furniture, including wedding jewelry. So we do find that in the larger cities, there is a tendency among consumers to get things on rent. They want a asset light usage. So they don't want to own the asset. Actually, for example, things like Uber is also, they want to use the vehicles, but only for functionality part for an occasion, like from going from point A to point B. They don't want to own a vehicle as such. So there are three classes of consumers which have emerged in this landscape, especially in the bigger cities. There are those young millennials who do not want to put a down payment, or they don't have the money for a down payment. Remember, down payment can be as high as 20% in car financing. They don't have that sort of money, but they want a usage. They have a regular income, but they don't want to make large payments. Second is there are those people who are really rich, who are very evolved, who want to change cars every 2-3 years, but they just want to use the car for 2-3 years and change it. For them, they don't want to own the asset. Third is those people who are in jobs like, let's say, consultancy, or jobs where they go out of the city. They know they will come back after 2-3 years. They don't want to go through the hassle of going through the insurance, the finance, etc., etc. And that is what the subscription service offers. So earlier we used to find it very strange that anybody should take to car usage other than actually paying cash for it, or for getting the vehicle through financing. But now there is a third option where you can actually rent out a vehicle, so to say, in a broad terms. It's like a fleet. Sale, except that the time periods are shorter. So the fleet thing is a little longer time periods. This is for a shorter period, could be as little as 6 months to 2 years. And also remember, at some point, especially for people in my generation, we never thought that people would get jewelry and lehengas on rent for the wedding. So we used to have our chachis and mausis and nanis and dadis all put together, trying to say, "Tu is color ka lehenga legi." You know how things were in that thing, or what color of suit you will purchase. Today, it's not so. People in some parts of the country, they get it directly for some time, and that's it. So this subscription service actually offers the asset light usage of the vehicle. So it's like a small way. You don't have the hassles of insurance or financing or maintenance. And I believe that this process has been sort of accelerated by pandemic, because pandemic में क्या हुआ है कि lot of people do not want, they are little unsure of the future earning potential. So they would rather not make a commitment for 5 year of financing or 4 year of financing, and they would rather have a option of getting out of a car after a couple of years, having made those rental payments, even if it is a slightly higher payment as a rent per month. So that is the thing which is, it's by the way 3 years, 4 years since it was introduced in the world. It's been about 2 years since it was introduced in India through Zoom Car in January 2018. And we also have the Rev, as some of you might be knowing, who are actually into this business of subscription. So we have got a fairly good response. We are still doing this. We did a pilot for some time in 8 cities. We are now expanding to 14, and by June end we should be expanding to almost 20 cities. And the initial response seems to be very good. Going forward, I think it can be a very important part of the whole portfolio of the option for consumers to use cars. One is through buying through cash or finance, and the other is renting through subscription.
Right. So what I hear you is that the crisis has in a way accentuated the demand for subscription, but need not be it is a product of
Yes.
the crisis.
Absolutely,
See,
absolutely.
Probably some change probably that would continue after the crisis.
Absolutely, absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely.
So Deepak, now let me ask you further in the context of the way you defined luxury, which was relative, and you are referring to it as it's experience, right? That's true. Now, what do you think are the important changes that has happened in your business area or luxury market per se, which you think is going to be continuing going forward, which probably is not a response to the crisis, but it probably is a catalyst for a behavior change?
I think all the hotels, they are real estate. And in financial institution term, we call them asset.
Right.
And what is going to happen right now is, and going back to your question, Professor Anirban, when you said about the vertical destination. So I think it will fit in there, but we were vertical destination before COVID. Now the asset class going down 10 years is going to change drastically. And why the asset class is going to change is because right now central banks in respective countries are allowing a lot of real estates to hold on. But then principals are getting accumulated, interests are getting accumulated, and there's a shortfall in the cash flow or the expected cash flow. Let me put it this way. Now, when these things happen, there's a lot of money. We call it instruments, financial instruments that come into the market and they start playing. Now, any investor that is going to buy into the asset will be looking at entry level of acquisition to be low and looking for the time period, which was earlier 10 years, to be 7 years or 6 years to make his returns. Now, when these things will happen, I'm saying 10 years down the line, when these things will happen, and sorry, digressing a little bit, Maruti business and Uber business is a little bit different than the hospitality business. Because when these things will happen, what is going to happen is the constitution of the customer is going to change. And when the constitution of the customer is going to change, meaning corporate business would be less, weddings would be limited number of people. I fully agree with Shashank, and it's a great point he made that the new generation, we call them millennials, they don't mind going and renting these things. They don't want to put in that money for two reasons. One, they see this as an extra expense, and second, they don't have that much of a disposable income as baby boomers. That is point number one. Point number two is, let's assume that the vaccine in India has started rolling in, and 6 months the COVID is gone. Even to go back to the travel demand of 2019 is going to take another 24 months because there are a lot of aircrafts that are grounded. Now you can get these aircrafts in service concurrently, but the pilots are rusted. If we recently read the FAA report of Pakistan International Airlines crash, it was because it was a rusty pilot. Now, the whole thing of this whole conference, it began, and we all three coming from different businesses, related and unrelated, agreed on one part. Actually, it is our related business because you need a car or you need a Uber to go to a hotel and enjoy the restaurant. So in a way, it is a part of the journey, the whole experience. So it is related business. The trust level won't be there until the pilots are trained and they do specific asks. So that is going to take another 24 months. And these 24 months will make the asset class ready for millennials. Now, when the asset class will be ready for millennials, no international hotel company today, or I would say most of the international hotel companies, are not ready for millennials. Because all this while, the whole marketing, the whole system, all processes were based on baby boomers. And that shift is going to change the whole asset class going forward. And what you will see is, you will see shorter travels. You will see a rise of regional hotel companies. You will see a rise of local players within the countries becoming better. You will see a change in technology. And when all these things happen, the alternative economy will also change. We all have seen that in the past with technology change, how the economies have changed. 3G had a different set of companies. When 4G came, a different set of companies came. Tomorrow, if 5G comes, a different kind of economy that will come in. So saying that, why it's so much of thing that will happen to the hospitality business, hotel business in terms of asset classes, because we are not very innovative. We have always in hotels, corporate airlines, we have revenue per available room. We have taken that from airlines, revenue per available seat. We started serving food in our restaurants. That is because the flights, the food was being served. We have TVs in the room. If you go many years back, there were no TVs because flights were showing the in-flight TVs and everything. So we have copied that model, but that is a transport model, which is very different than a staying model. So you will see the rise of villa renters, Airbnbs, and things like that. These businesses are doing well, not because they are very innovative. It is because the hospitality business, the business we are in hotels, we lack the understanding, or we lack to understand the shift in customer base.
That's interesting. This entire mention of how you see the things changing, and this entire focus on regional business model rather than global brands, which is going to probably promise different kind of experience, and that's the luxury. That's how I would look at this narrative that you have built. That's interesting, and we'll come back to that. So Sanjay, what do you think is going to be staying with businesses, yours or otherwise, as we move beyond the crisis?
Yeah, so like I mentioned, some things will remain the same and some will change. I think what will get added is the safety and the hygiene. And sorry for the commotion. I have my entire family back from the Parker class.
Yeah. And I noticed that you are also a proud hashtag girl dad badge holder, so that's fine.
Yes, so she's just finished her Parker and she's come back, and the dog is greeting her. So yeah, so like I said, Professor Anirban, I think the key is that new things like safety and hygiene have got added, and what hasn't changed is the customer experience part and the trust.
So what you mean to say that trust, but then we have seen different, let me say, dimensions of trust while we have been talking about trust, and especially for all the businesses, right? So Shashank also mentioned about database, Uber has so much of information, and there is so much of discussion that we know is going around. Even hotel or hospitality would have data, and trust and data seems not to be, very much, let me say, in a happy marriage yet. There could be different degrees of dissatisfaction from a customer or a consumer point of view. So what do you think about that aspect, going forward? Because trust, one is obviously safety, hygiene is going to go up. But what about these other emerging issues in a phygital business?
I think the view on data has to be that we have fiduciary responsibility on the customer's information. I think where customers are good with data is where it helps them increase their personal or improve their personal experience. I think where they don't want data to be used is when it is used for a third party's benefit, right? Especially when it comes to using it for advertising, targeting information. I think that is a place where it gets a little dicey. But if you were to use it to improve the experience, I think a lot of people are willing to share their information, like, which is the spot where we are not able to manage our ETA in the best possible manner. And if we can improve that, we can use that information to improve our service. Right. And as long as you don't use personal information, but you use the information to drive better personal experience, I think that is a good way of looking at making data work for the customer than leveraging their data to work for someone else.
Right, interesting. Shashank, on the same note, how do you think data, cybersecurity, and the entire context of managing phygital business from a car or automobile industry point of view?
Yeah, so there are many aspects by which you can use data, especially when you have now tools like AI and ML and all the big data analysis that's possible. So it's not just about consumer experience. For example, in our industry, it could be about automated processes. It could be about automation in production. It could be about inventory management in supply chain. This could be logistics. It could be media planning, for example. It could be forecasting. It could be, there is a huge number of ways in which data and digitalization can be used other than just consumer interface. But I think your question pertains to the consumer interface part. And I think there, as Sanjay rightly pointed out, consumers don't mind if that data is used for enhancing their experience. What they mind is if it is used for things which they were never sort of wanted it to be used that way. So I think data privacy, we are still at a very nascent stage as far as our country laws are concerned. I think the laws themselves should make sure that data privacy, misuse of data for purposes other than what the consumer intended will actually come true, that the laws will be so strict that anybody using data on consumers, individual data, would actually be very answerable. But that does not mean that we should stop the development and usage of that data, because as long as you are fair and honest, you don't intend to misuse or monetize it for your own purpose, I think it is fine. I give you an example. We used to look at our data, and separately, we have our service team calling people, how's the vehicle doing, etc., etc. You have a CRM department which takes care of consumer complaints if consumer complains. So it's very, and you launch let's say a new product or a service. Now, that guy has put in a complaint and he's actually very dissatisfied. Here comes another call which says, sir, we are offering so and so, it's a new product. So he's most likely to be his reaction will be extremely negative. So what we are looking at, having a single view of customer which enhances the experience. And I'm talking only now on the consumer interaction part.
Right.
We have a lot of transactional data. For example, Maruti Suzuki has huge amount of transactional data information, which is our DMS system. But we also now are including it with the non-transactional, the interactional data, as they call. So when you marry the interactional data with the transactional data, you have a single view of customer, which gives a beautiful experience to the customer. For example, if a customer is, we have a digital tool called Sprinkler, which also takes care of, which sort of looks at what consumers are saying about your brand. in the social
social
media. Yeah, for example, in the social media. It's a great tool because you can always address there's a lot of people don't complain officially, but they are not really satisfied. They sort of talk about it to friends, or so you can always address that, and in other words, to add to consumer satisfaction and loyalty. Another example I can give, especially for students who might be watching this, very recently we had a WagonR customer who bought a vehicle about 15-16 years back. He from his interaction and from our database, we knew that he had a daughter, and the daughter, from various views of the customer, we knew that the daughter was going to pass out of college last year. We did contact that customer. He was very happy. The daughter today is a owner of a Maruti Espresso. It's only because they thought that we are like really wanting to sort of be of help as far as the transportation requirements of the family was concerned. So there's some ways in which the consumer will feel really happy if we were, and it's good for the manufacturer, I mean, good for the marketer also. Or for example, the media consumption habits. It's a very clear thing. You can have, for example, a more personalization done, and it's all allowed because it is all possible because of digital this thing. So it is also possible, for example, for you to have suppression of ads or suppression of messages for certain class of people, because they may be not in that category at all. So rather than just putting out an advertisement across all media, hoping, as they say, spray and pray, it can be really, really focused to personalized messages through communication. So all these are things where you can use data and consumer will be very happy about it. The other part about the privacy and etc., that I must say one thing, that since we all agreed, and Sanjay mentioned it, Deepak mentioned it, I mentioned it, trust is the new currency for brand differentiation. Should you ever lose that trust, then you will be punished not just in that data part, you will be punished across all your services. Even if you are fantastic in after sales service, if you have used the data wrongly, you have betrayed the trust in any way, then they are going to be extremely dissatisfied with your after sales service also. So that actually ups the stake for the marketers, because one wrong action on this data part, even if it breaks the trust even once, is going to be very, very expensive across all products and services that the manufacturer or the marketer may offer.
Sure, very, very interesting. Deepak, your quick view on this, and then we'll probably come back to the questions. I've got a large number of questions from the audience, so I'll have to select and put in. But I'll have one, question that emerged from the discussions after Deepak, puts it.
So you're asking me something, or you're asking?
Yeah, asking in the context of this trust and data, because again, hospitality is one other industry which probably remarket, retarget.
I'll be Professor Anirban very brief, because this whole panel is becoming very serious and very informative. So I got this WhatsApp joke on. So the WhatsApp joke said that you are chatting with your girlfriend. At the same time, your wife is on a Facebook and she is getting recommendation from the divorce lawyers. So saying this about data, I think luxury, on a serious note, luxury will see a different thing. We all have read what Bottega Veneta has done, and they have suspended all social media accounts. So data is something, when it comes to luxury, there'll be more privacy that would be needed, because there's a lot of money that is being spent. So we will have a very different way of looking at data and looking at social media, because the privacy of people is at stake, and trust is a very important factor, which we said. So why don't we take the questions from the audience?
Sure.
Thank you, Professor Anirban.
Thanks a lot. So let me go with the questions. So let me start with a question that has been put across by Girish, where he has been actually talking about that what is the importance of cybersecurity in automobile industry. That was directed to Shashank. which I think you have already referred to. If there is anything that you'd like to add on in terms
Yeah,
of
I think, yeah, I think Girish also probably is referring to the autonomous and the telematic, which are now also getting increasingly prevalent. We have, connected cars as well. We have cars are actually now the highest components are actually electronics now, not metal. So I think he's referring to that. So telematics is actually used, for example, in fleet management to find out drivers' habits, how many times he brakes, how many times, so what is the speed at which he's, or tracking cars as some, for safety purpose and so on. So I think it's very important that there is adequate firewalls which prevent any misuse by hackers or people who actually might be interested in using data in any form which is unintended by the consumer. So I think Girish probably is referring to that, apart from what I mentioned about the consumer.
Right. I think he just clarified that's what he has been talking.
Yes, and that's actually a very important. You in autonomous car. In sometimes if you are in semi-autonomous and autonomous cars, there have been instances where people have taken over the vehicle. So you in effect lose control of the vehicle. The vehicle is being controlled by somewhere else. So those things are can happen really. So with the internet, we now are talking of Internet of Cars, where cars not only talk to each other, but they are also talking back home or back to some central cloud base. And that can be really a dangerous thing from a hacking point of view. So really, we need to have very strong firewalls which prevent such possibilities.
Right, thanks. This question is for Deepak, which has come from Nikhil, where I think his question is, approach to marketing has become very organic by adjusting flexible cancellation plans, attracting staycations, refining the target audience, changing the call to action strategy, and rethinking about the content that you have. So how do you plan in a hotel industry or hospitality, right? So if everything is so fluid and organic, how do you plan?
Everything has a lead time. And when everything is a lead time, what we do is we increase the frequency of that. So in 2016, our lead time for booking in hotel was 3 months. And suddenly in 2018, 2019, it became 7 days. And during COVID time, because of staycation, it is less than 8 hours.
So trying to understand the change, that's happening continuously. So
yeah, and we as a small company, forget small company, even the bigger companies are working with OTAs, online travel agents. And online travel agents, they are very expert. So you meet with your partners, they tell you what the forecast is, how the business would look like. Then that is how you manage your business on books.
Mm-hmm. Okay, interesting. Here is a question from Professor Umashankar for Deepak again. What was the significant difference between how the Indian luxury brands did during this period and how did Lebua operate? That's what he has.
Within India or outside India, Professor Venkatesh, please? Because we have Lebua in India and Lebua outside India.
Lebua, Thailand, let's say, I wanted to compare with India and other countries.
Okay, so Lebua, Thailand, actually what happened in Thailand is the hotel part, where it comes to the occupancy part, did very bad because hardly any domestic business. So every hotel became a single digit occupancy unless you are the quarantine hotel. Okay, that is what has happened. Whereas in India, the occupancy went up. The contrast, what we saw is the food and beverage business in Thailand increased quite a lot vis-a-vis India. So meaning people who were traveling were essential traveling, like Sanjay had said, that Uber came with the essential travel, Uber essential. So those were essential traveling, regional traveling, so they were staying in the hotel. But when it came to leisure in India, going to the restaurants, eating, everything that went down. But in Thailand, the leisure traveling as a, what do I say, cultural, they don't go and stay in the hotel, they go and stay with the relatives, is stayed the same. But going out to eat, sorry, leisure staying and leisure eating went much higher. So that's the difference we have seen.
Okay. There is a question from Professor Sheetal, where she says that can you, and this is open to all, give few instances of resilience strategies adopted by each one of your companies, right, to overcome the COVID crisis, right? So any one of you can, pick it up and speak. Maybe Sanjay.
Sure, it's a very, very good question. Personally, very relatable. I think I can share a couple of things that I experienced, and maybe that is what we did well as a company. I think first was a lot of communication. So just leaders across Uber, whether globally or in India, communicated how difficult it was for them as well, so that you weren't unique in the problems that you were facing, and it made our leadership very approachable. And the problems that we faced at a human level were actually very common across. Second was to bring your whole self to work. You just saw my daughter come in, my dog barked, and it is that is just my life, and it's completely acceptable at Uber. So you have kids popping in, you have people doing their chores while they're on the calls, because it is just something that you need to accept in the post-COVID world. And I think that was one thing is saying it, but being able to execute it at this scale was truly phenomenal. And I feel privileged to work for an organization where that is seen as being important. And the third one was, we had some downtime, and it was different by different cultures. Like for us in India, we had just hours off in the middle of the day because a lot of us had to do our chores, which we are not used to. So we just got that time. Some other parts had just days off during festivals where the entire office was shut, where they were just able to focus on other things and not work. So I just felt that the environment that got created was very accommodating. And it was seen as a problem that is faced by all, and the fact that no one really knows what the best solution is. So we will cater solutions that suit you. And I think that really helped build resilience. And the second piece was just that faith that if you continue to do the right thing by the customers and the community, eventually, the crisis would disappear or lessen, and that you would emerge stronger. And I think that really helped us, because I don't think we worked harder ever than we worked during the COVID crisis. Everything had to change, and across, and I'm true, this is for everyone, all of you also, in terms of how you looked at education. And at that point in time, to have that reassurance that you're doing the right thing in terms of past was great.
Interesting. Anyone would like to add on to what Sanjay said?
Yeah, I think what we are very proud of at Lebua is we supported our employees, and our customers also appreciated that fact. And I just wanted to touch base because today, as per the ILO report, there are 1.8 billion people who are in employment are at edge of losing their jobs. I think more than 60% people who are in employment, their companies have closed down worldwide. So they are sitting at home or doing a little bit of work from home. So supporting the employee was the first thing. Second was what we did during the COVID period is some of the guests who were a little bit reluctant because it is a mind game, like it's a fear. We started sending them something small to their home just to let them know that we are there. And we kept on informing them proper infographics and things like that, what the situation is, what is happening in the market, and the practices they should follow if they visit us, and the new protocols we have put. So during COVID, I don't think so anybody could have done much, because the negative side was a lot. Schools got closed, universities got closed, people got unemployed, uh, certain people started losing their house because they couldn't pay the mortgage, things like that. So to offset that, if you keep your employees in a job, that was the main thing. Second thing is we got in touch with certain universities where the students do come and do internship with us. And we said, as and when the travel resumes, we will start those internship programs and things like that, keeping in touch with the customers. I think in our industry, these are the three things basically we could do, and work with the banks to make sure that our business stay viable and we are back as and when needed.
Right. Okay. So there are more questions over there, but I think we have limited time. So there's a couple of more questions. There's one question which actually, if I sum it up, says it's a question for Shashank. Your view on electric vehicle, because of your recent tie-up as well in that area, with the current infrastructure that we have, right? So the charging stations and all other aspects. So how do you see that going?
Yeah, so I think the transition to electric vehicles definitely will happen at some point of time completely. It's only how long is it going to take that. So just to give you a sort of a brief, quick brief of what is the situation at the moment. Across the world, the penetration of electric vehicles hasn't really taken off. It's about 2% of the 90 million cars which were sold last year. In some countries, it's high, like in Norway or Netherlands, but mostly not. And in India, there are three reasons. In fact, across the world, there are three reasons why penetration of electric vehicles hasn't really taken off. One, as you mentioned, is the infrastructure of charging. In places like Japan or US, 85% of the vehicles are parked at the same spot every day or night, which is in a garage or in some specific spot. In India, it's the other way. Even in gated communities, you don't have a specific parking lot. So charging infrastructure is quite related to that as well. Second, the price, the cost of acquisition of electric vehicles is very high. Electric vehicle, the cost of battery is about 55 to 60% of the total cost. The battery cost can only come down if there is a breakthrough in a technology which makes the cost of battery low. It hasn't happened so far. So what is really happening is, and third is, of course, the range anxiety, which is how long the car can travel on a single charge. And if traffic situation is bad, if there is uncertainty on the amount of time each trip or the distance each trip will have, you may need diversions, then it becomes difficult. These are the three main factors which are reducing. Having said that, going forward, you would find that the cost of the powertrain of electric vehicles will keep coming down once the battery cost comes down. And the cost of powertrain of the ICE engine, which is the regular diesel petrol engine, will keep on going up because you have new regulations coming in on emissions. So in US, for example, it's about $9,000 is the cost of the ICE engine powertrain, $16,000 for electric vehicle. So that will keep coming down. 9,000 will keep going up, and at some point they will cross. That's the point of inflection. And till that time, we will find that there would be an intermediate stage, which we say is a hybrid stage. So the road to electric vehicles is through electrified vehicles, which is the hybrid vehicles. Remember, the powertrain components of electric vehicle and the hybrid vehicles are fairly common. And that is important that we support hybrid vehicles in our country, because ultimately that will help localization and bring the cost of acquisition down. And that, I believe, will be the path towards electric vehicles in India.
Okay. So one last question, again, I'm keeping it open.
Professor Anirban, I just have one point to add. It is not on the topic of electric vehicles, but GM just introduced their new logo. And it'll be just great for the students to just have a look at that, because they're completely betting on electric, and it's reflected in their logo. So that's just a good branding exercise for the team to have.
Sure. I'm sure they would have, given the social media being there, I'm sure, from capital to small letters, and the interesting play on blue would have already been noticed by them, as has been. And in fact, 2021 has seen multiple major logo changes, including Burger King, right? So let's see, everyone is thinking of a new beginning. So this question has come from Professor Palhan. And if I may just quickly put it, is that his question is that impact of pandemic had a role to play on, the inventory of the suppliers. And we have all been talking a lot about JIT, right? Just in time. There was, another industry guy where I had interacted in recent times. He came up with a very interesting point of view on that, saying that, okay, probably that became more of just as time demands rather than just in time, given that planning went for haywire. What is your view on that in the current times? Because JIT would require a lot of pre-planning, a lot of certainty, and we are living through something which is pretty uncertain.
For JIT, I think the country infrastructure, the customs, the inventory, there are many factors that will take place. For our business, JIT maybe or maybe not will work, because for top quality food products, we have to import it from US, we have to import it from Europe, we have to manage it. So it comes 2 times a week, or maybe it comes 3 times a week. So for us, JIT in our kind of business may not work, because the consumables, it comes and it get perished. But then for local produce, if we use JIT works, and we use JIT.
Shashank, would you like to highlight that?
Yeah, so we are looking at inventories in 2 parts. One is the finished goods inventory, and then there is the component inventory as far as the auto industry is concerned. So on the finished goods inventory, yes, there is we have been reducing inventory significantly, partly also because the demand bounce back has been faster than the supply bounce back. So post pandemic and during pandemic, that has been the trend. Also, one of the ways we can reduce the inventory obviously is by forecasting better. And I think now with the forecasting tools which are available, thanks to the heavy data crunching which is possible through even, as I mentioned, ML and AI as big data, it's possible to actually forecast much better. That's one aspect. Second is we can have more company-owned stockyards, which we have actually 6 of them, which is in different geographical location, helping finished goods inventory management at the dealerships much better. On the component side, it's a little complex, because you have some components which might be imported. There are some components which may be coming from different distances, as vendors may be at different points. Their physical location may be different. But interestingly, we at our end normally have a very small inventory at the factory for production of vehicles. And you are right. If there is uncertainty, as is the situation today, we would like to keep actually a slightly buffer, a higher inventory, because otherwise the finished goods production itself becomes a question mark. But otherwise, I think the world and the two is moving towards lower inventory, not higher inventory, and that's possible because of better systems in order processing, in inventory management, of forecasting, and that I think is playing out in the auto industry clearly.
Right. Okay. So great. All of you have, I think, helped everyone over here to learn more about how you not just only manage the crisis, but also, identify certain points which is going to drive the business in the new normal. My big take is trust in multiple dimension is going to be one of the major business drivers. While we take it as a hygiene, but probably that also is going to become the differentiator or the distinctiveness that one creates. The other important thing that I could figure out of this entire discussion was the role of empathy. And that's within the organization or across stakeholders or society at large. And that's something which is going to be, governing the way you are going to, or any business is going to look at changing models, restructuring, or probably reproposing their ways going forward. Digital is the time that we live in and will continue to live. And on that, optimistic note, let me request Professor Jones Matthew to do the formal vote of thanks.
Good evening, Mr. Srivastava, Mr. Gupta, and Mr. Ohri, thank you very much for being on this panel. It's been an absolute pleasure listening to you and listening to the nuances of how your organizations, firms have survived this pandemic, and how these crises have sort of inspired the innovations in terms of building around brand trust, supply chain, subscription models, reinventing or redefining luxury, even while you continue to remain honest to your principles. As Anirban mentioned, empathy, all of those key factors which have somehow, which are going to be perennially with us. And thank you very much for being here and sharing your insights. And also from the mobility area, what Sanjay shared about various aspects of how Uber tried to redefine customer experience as well as employee experience, right? So all of those factors, I believe, will continue to play a major role in the future of all of these industries. And going forward, we look forward to watching out for the markers that you have mentioned in your speeches or in your conversations, and observing how well they turn out and how much of a lesson this pandemic has been for us. Thank you very much personally, Sanjay, as well as Deepak, for honoring us with your presence, and Mr. Shashank also. Thank you very much for being here at the marketing panel of Sapience.